news. Every time we raise the issue of how a woman in various stages of pregnancy is treated when it becomes apparent they will miscarry, we're swamped with stories about how people feel ignored and let down by the health system. Now, we started this week by talking to a young woman who presented at Campbelltown Hospital. We're going to keep on top of her case, and we'll go back to it and talk to the government about that through the week. She was sent home twice, despite presenting with what was obviously an issue. We talked to her, Rose Taylor, and the story was passed on to the Premier, who seemed to have little sympathy. The government didn't seem to have sympathy. Well, off the back of that conversation, we received an email from somebody who we will simply call Steve, and we'll use only that first name. He has sent us details of his story, he and his partner, and what happened to them when they presented at the Belmont Hospital, Newcastle. Steve's on the line. Morning to you.
Morning, Steve. How are you?
I'm okay. I read your email and I simply couldn't believe it. So let's take the audience through it, because it is one hell of a story with what we both must say is an extraordinarily happy ending.
Oh, yeah, but it was a crazy time.
But a crazy time. Take us through exactly what happened.
Well, my partner at the time was since separated. She rang me at work 4:30 on a Friday afternoon and said, "I've just had a shower and I'm bleeding." Like, we knew she was pregnant. So I rushed home and rushed to the hospital. We got to Belmont Hospital about 5. They said, "Oh, all right, we'll take a seat." 20 past 6, we're still sitting there. She's bleeding heavily. More people are coming into the room.
And she's 10 weeks into the pregnancy at this stage?
Yeah, around 10 weeks, yeah.
Yep.
So we're in just the waiting room of emergency. More people are coming in on Friday afternoon. She's still bleeding heavily. We end up having a blow-up about 6, so they put us into like a private room in the emergency department.
Yep.
It was still another 2 hours before we saw a doctor. He came in and was sort of a bit blasé about it all. Took some blood tests, which had to go to the John Hunter Hospital. So it takes about an hour for them to come back.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about 9:30. Next we knew about it, he's in the centre area there where all the doctors and nurses all talk, and we hear him on the phone, and he said, "I've got so-and-so here.
Yep.
She's just had a miscarriage."
So that you clearly heard him say that.
That was, yeah. Other people in the emergency department heard that as well.
Well, that's awful in its own way, isn't it?
Yeah, and that was the first we knew of it.
Yep.
Like, we knew she was
So
bleeding.
you heard by him overhearing a phone conversation he was having.
That was it. That was how we found out. So we found out at the same time as everyone else in that emergency department.
So they then came and gave you some choices as to what to do that night?
So he came in and sort of went through the details of it all, and then it was just on 10 o'clock. He come back in, and she was quite upset at this stage, and she said, "So what's the plan?" He said, "Well, my plan's to go home. Don't know what your plan is."
Oh.
And yeah, I was more dumbfounded than anything that he would just be like that.
You couldn't be even angry, you'd just be gobsmacked.
And I was shocked. I was seriously shocked, and this is how he'd treat us all night.
Yeah.
And then he said, "Well, you've basically got the choice. You can go home and bleed and come back tomorrow, or we'd prefer to keep you here and give you a curette in the morning, because if you go home and bleed out and die, then it's on our head."
Okay, so they recommend you stay, so you're sensible and you say fine.
So we waited another hour. It was just before midnight. They took her up to a ward.
Yep.
So we've been there since 5.
She gets admitted, you go home and say, "I'll come back and get you at 10 in the morning."
They said, "Come back 9, 10 in the morning. She'll have been to surgery about 6.
And that was to basically do a curette.
Do a curette and remove everything. So yeah, that was fine. So I get up there. It was just after 9:30 the next morning. Go to the waiting area, and I asked where she was, and they said, "Oh, she's in the ward." So I'm expecting all these problems. So I go up to the ward, and she's sitting there with a smile on her face.
A smile on her face?
And I said, "Yeah." I said, "What's going on?" And they were prepping her for surgery, and she was crying, and not the surgeon that was doing the curette, but another surgeon who was a family friend of theirs walked past and saw her. And he come and comforted her and said, "Listen, how about we do an ultrasound before you go?" They brought a mobile ultrasound machine up, and there was a heartbeat.
A heartbeat?
Yes.
So, indeed, she was pregnant and hadn't had a miscarriage?
She hadn't had a miscarriage. They didn't even test that the night before. They weren't going to test it before surgery. So they called all the surgery off.
So do we dare to think what would have happened if that family friend hadn't walked past?
Well, my daughter wouldn't be here today.
And you've now got a 3.5-year-old daughter?
3.5-year-old beautiful daughter. And, yeah, and if it had been in the middle of the week, the surgery would have been open during the week and they would have done it, no questions asked.
You are two lucky people who must treasure that girl so much.
You can tell by her that she knows exactly what's going on. She cherishes every day.
Well, that's a story with an incredibly great ending, but one that just makes you have the hairs on the back of your neck stand up with horror that could happen.
We would never have known.
No.
And, yeah, she sits up before she wakes up, just ready to take on the day. And
what'd you call her?
Her name's Ali.
Ali.
Yeah.
Well, that's a wonderful story, Steve, but it really does give us all a real fright about what might happen in a public hospital.
That's exactly it. And after hearing that story on Monday, I just thought, well, I think it's time we told our story. I think as the days go on, it affects you more because you know what you nearly missed out on.
That's exactly right. Look, I'm going to send you up something. We've got these great prize packs from the New Zealand Snack Food Company. Acceptable, very much so, for 3.5-year-old girls. Pineapple lumps, Edmund's custard, all wonderful things from Kiwiland. So you hang on, we'll send that up to your daughter.
Thank you for that.
But thank you for being involved in the program and telling us
tell my story.
Yeah, no, I really, really, really appreciate you doing that.
Okay, thanks.
Good on you, Steve. Thank you. Isn't that amazing? What could have been? Now he's got a happy 3.5-year-old girl. 17 minutes.